Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Faith and Democracy. This is a series of one-on-one conversations with Democratic candidates for U.S. Senate, and I'm very glad that you have joined us today, whether you are watching live on YouTube or Facebook, or whether you're watching the recording. I'm Connie Ryan, Executive Director of Interfaith Alliance of Iowa and Action Fund, and I, as I said, am grateful to you. The recordings of each of the candidate interviews will remain on Facebook and on YouTube, as well as on our website. And so we do encourage you to send those links to friends and family so that they can learn about the candidates and their views on a lot of really important topics. And that is the purpose of our Faith and Democracy conversations in series, is really to educate voters across Iowa about the viewpoints of candidates on a very broad spectrum of issues that our organization educates and advocates on behalf of Iowans every day. And so we're really hosting individual conversations with the three candidates so that we can dive in deeper on a lot of different issues rather than a forum kind of platform. So we are glad that you are with us. You can see the first interview that I did last week, and that is up on the website and on both social media platforms. And then we'll have the third candidate next week as well. But I want to welcome Dr. Glenn Hurst, who has been an outspoken advocate for rural Iowans. He currently is the councilperson on the Minden City Council. He is the chair of the Iowa Democratic Party's Rural Caucus and past chair of the 3rd Congressional District Committee. He was a leader in the Indivisible movement and has been featured on national news outlets for his advocacy for rural Iowans and seniors. Welcome, Dr. Hurst. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And, I want to ask you a lot of different questions, and I had them in a different order. And then events over the weekend made me really think about things a little bit differently. And I want to start with the issue of hate and bigotry and really the role of government to address issues of hate and bigotry. And we know there's been an uptick in incidents of hate speech, and violence over the last several years. It's impacted the Jewish community, Muslim community, Black, Latinx, Asian communities, and the LGBTQ communities in particular. And white supremacy oftentimes is equated with white nationalism and is really that driver of a lot of that increase. It's not solely that, but it is a driver of that. And the reason, obviously, that it came to mind to put this at the top of this conversation is this weekend, there was a young man who walked into a grocery store in Brooklyn, killed 10 people, injured a bunch of other folks, and is a self-declared white supremacist, targeted a grocery store, drove 4 hours by all accounts, and drove to a neighborhood that is predominantly Black. Angry at people who are Black, angry at people who are Jewish, but really targeted the Black community in his killing of 10 people and injuring so many more. And so my question to you really is around what is the role of government in not only talking about hate and hate crimes, violence, but actually doing action? What are specific solutions that Congress should take in addressing hate speech and the growth of white supremacy?
So, hate speech is, an issue that I faced directly several years ago. There was a group that came to Oakland, Iowa, which is a small community here in Potawatomi County. And it was brought in actually by the chair of the Republican Party. And it's a guy who has gone on to participate in the January 6th insurrection. And now he's running for county supervisor. And so bigotry and hate speech does not negate one, apparently, from being able to participate and think they have a chance in Iowa politics. And that should be very, very concerning. The contention we had at the time this individual sponsored a group whose name I'm not going to use because I don't want to give him any attention, but sponsored a group that came to Oakland with the contention that being a Muslim was un-American, it wasn't a religion, it doesn't deserve protection of the First Amendment rights, and that all people who practice Islam should be, stripped of certain rights. And the group that he brought in really was supporting being very actively negative against individuals, Muslims. And we took the position that speech probably shouldn't have been allowed because it was like standing up in a theater and yelling fire. It was a direct call to action against a certain group of people. And that's where you have to draw the line. Now, my personal belief just about the things they were saying, I feel like, and I felt like, and I still do, that we had this discussion in the 1940s, right? It was called World War II, and we stood up against this type of white nationalism, and the collective decision was that's not appropriate, and that's not American. It's un-American. All of our boomer generation, their parents and they that served in the war had made that very clear. So it's incredibly distressing. And I think your question was really about what's the government's role in that. We've got to protect people from that direct action of violence. And those organizations that are collecting weapons and forming as militias and are planning violence and advocate violence, that needs to be stopped. And we should be directly confronting those organizations.
Thank you. And since you mentioned militia and guns, I'm going to go to a question around guns and gun violence as well, because it is certainly connected, and the violence that we're seeing with white supremacy is certainly also connected. Guns are obviously used in different ways as well, but that's a piece of it. And so we saw the mass shooting in Brooklyn. There was a shooting at a church also this weekend in Laguna Woods, California, where one person was murdered and five others were injured. Not necessarily a hate crime, but use of guns for violence. In Iowa last week, we learned of a man who was found dead in Ames with multiple gunshot wounds. Last weekend, there were 3 teenagers in Des Moines who were shot and injured after a post-prom party. In Iowa City last week, also, a person was shot near the University of Iowa campus. A month ago in Cedar Rapids, 2 people were killed and 10 people were injured. In March, 3 teens were shot outside of a Des Moines high school. The list goes on and on. That's just in the last couple of months. And so, and the rates of gun deaths, gun violence continue to go up, not only in Iowa, but also across our nation. And I can certainly give you a lot of statistics, but the important question is, as a U.S. Senator, if you were to hold that office, what is the number one thing you would do to curb gun violence in our country and make our communities safer, including for our children?
So I think the thing that we can do, number one, is require background checks, federal background checks. And I believe that we require those background checks to be an ongoing process, similar to your driver's license. You have to prove that you're a safe driver every several years. We need to prove that you continue to be a safe gun owner over a period of time. As well, because people change and things happen and life experience happens, and a person who may have been deemed safe at one point in time may not be safe at a later point in time, and that needs to be identified. So I would move for a federal licensure for gun ownership. I believe with that, we then need to be implementing further controls on the types of weapons that people can own. And we also need to think about gun violence beyond just the number of times the trigger has been pulled. Okay, because gun ownership it can be used as a threat. Not pulling the trigger, but just the presence of the weapon, just the knowledge that you have the capability to exert that type of power over somebody's life affects an individual's freedom. I think specifically about people in unsafe relationships where there's a dominant, threatening component to the relationship, and when you add a gun to that, it's a greater risk. When we're talking about potential risks here in Potawatomi County, we had a militia embed itself with the sheriff's department, and it was during the George Floyd rallies and protests that there was a threat made that there would be a protest in Council Bluffs, and this militia showed up with their weapons. What if something had happened, right? What if one trigger had been pulled? What if somebody had made a threat towards them? What would the retaliation be? And it's just not. It's not safe. That's not America. And so I would absolutely look at limiting the type of weapons that could be put into people's hands as well.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to switch a little bit. It's still related, I think. And you mentioned the murder of George Floyd. And I want to talk a little bit about racial equality and equity. And in addition to hate crimes and hate speech, we know that there is a long history in our country impacting particularly the Black community. Our nation continues to struggle with even acknowledging our history of slavery, racism, Jim Crow, and inequality experienced in the impact on the Black community. And it is painful, but there is no denying. And I believe that our nation must accept responsibility for that history and the current day's impact and right the wrongs that our ancestors did in those times.
I believe that means reparations.
Yeah. And so I was going to go to the question, and so what your views are on that, and if you want to talk a little bit more about reparations, but what your views on that and how our country must address racism and the impact on Black community and all communities of color as well. But what is our nation's responsibility, and what is our federal government's responsibility in that?
Sure. I believe that nationally we have a responsibility to provide reparations. We're talking about writing the check. Okay. And I believe that that's something we should be doing. There is generation after generation after generation of successful white families and corporations and businesses in this country that built everything off of the free labor, which is a generous way to describe it,
right.
That's taken place in the founding of our country. And so that's got to be on the table. And I understand we're talking about redistribution of wealth and money, but that's completely appropriate in the situation we've seen, and it's there. When you look at the growth, the wealth curve in our nation, there's a 1% of the population that holds so much wealth that they're practically invisible. And there really are two classes. There's the 1%, and there's all the rest of us. I mean, I honestly have more in common with the homeless gentleman at the shelter we serve at than I have in common with people who actually have true wealth in this nation. And that I'm a physician and not doing poorly unless you look at me on the growth curve, in which case what I do is negligible. So I think that reparations actually absolutely have to be looked at, and I think a wealth tax is a way we do that as part of our federal government. I also think that we need to make some changes in the way our government works. A lot of my experience, working in communities of color, talking about why voter turnout in some of these communities is not better when we see a candidate that talks about, maybe they haven't said reparations, but they say, equality and civil rights. Why don't those communities turn out for those candidates? And the reason is that I'm told is, look, you've got a system that's built to work against us. No matter what kind of nice white moderate you might be, you're more interested in the status quo and peace and quiet justice rather than doing something and really getting it done. And when you ask us about, well, why don't we vote for people of color who run in that system? And it's because it's not about the individual, it's about the system and how broken the system is and how impossible it is to fix the system the way it works right now. So it's one of the reasons I believe in Senate rules reform the way I believe in it. I believe in getting rid of the filibuster. I don't care what act we're talking about that we really want to get passed. Act or no act on the table, it's time for the filibuster to go. And the reason is its job is to slow down the function of government. We don't need that anymore. We don't transport information via horseback. We have the ability to have robust debate in a timely manner. And getting rid of the filibuster would allow us to do things like pass the Voting Rights Act, making access to the ballot box equal. No matter what neighborhood you're from, no matter what state you're in, your vote in Iowa shouldn't be any harder to get than your vote in Alabama. But there is an absolute difference, though Iowa is moving to Alabama as quickly as possible, apparently. But I think that type of rules reform gives us the ability to adjust a little bit more quickly. And we need to adjust quickly. If you doubt that, it took us 100 years and a civil war to free American slaves, and then another 100 years to pass a Civil Rights Act. We're at 250 years later, and we're still about to debate whether or not women are full citizens in this country, if they have full body autonomy like every other citizen. So the filibuster is archaic. It's worthless. It needs to go, and it's a place that I think we begin to open the door for a more robust participation from everybody in this nation.
Thank you so much. I'm going to shift us a little bit. It is tangentially related, but a little bit of a shift. Core to our organization are the values of our democracy, of separation of church and state, separation of religion and government, religious freedom. And of course, the traditional way of looking at religious freedom is really that the government can't infringe on the rights of the people. So it is protecting religion. It's also protecting government from religion as well. Right-wing religious extremists have really manipulated that understanding to their own political agenda and using federal and state laws and the courts to their benefit. And they argue that religious freedom is about their personal religious beliefs that cannot be infringed upon by other individuals, and that their religious freedom really supersedes the civil rights of other people. And so, as U.S. Senator, how would you, or how should we balance the conflict between religious rights of some and the civil rights of others? And what's the role of Congress in that debate?
Oh boy, how much time do we have?
Right. All of these questions could be their own show.
Right,
Absolutely.
absolutely. My goodness.
Right.
I think the example that people might be able to kind of get their heads around here has to do with vaccination. Maybe that's an easier way to talk about this topic. And we talk about vaccination, but we're going, I'm sure we're going to talk about choice as well. A woman's right to choose, kind of two areas where it seems like there's conflicting information, conflicting positions, and there's really not. When your personal freedom is putting the population at risk, then there's a point at which we have to say, so our civil duty overrides that personal freedom, whether it's a religious freedom or whatever the freedom is you want to argue that you have. When the safety of our public and of our very existence, our very government, and perhaps even beyond our government, our very planet is affected, then it's appropriate for the government to step in and say, no, this is what's going to happen. Let's say the pandemic was as bad as it looked like it was going to be when it was first really announced and accepted in March of 2020, that there was this condition that was killing 25% of the people who had it in China. Again, if those numbers were real, we're talking about the loss of life on this planet. And if we had a vaccine at that point, there would be no question at all that we absolutely have to vaccinate everybody for the good of humankind. We certainly wanted to take the actions that we knew could work, right? So that's why we closed down things that weren't essential. Viruses don't do well when we spread the population out. And so those types of moves, those are about protecting the population of the planet. And that's got to supersede the individual at times. When we talk about choice and a woman's right to choose, we're really talking about something very different here. We're not talking about a person's right to say, no, you can't stick something in my arm, because this thing in your arm is about the public good. When we're talking about requiring a woman to carry a fetus to term, what we're talking about is requiring a person to use their body against their will for the benefit of another individual. Okay, not for the general public good. It's not like we're having 50% of the population seeking abortions. We're talking about an individual's body and what they do with it. I can't require anybody to donate blood, even though it will save the lives of people. I can't require anybody to donate a kidney. I can't even require them to allow me to take the kidney from their corpse without their written permission beforehand. And that's what we're talking about asking women to do with their body when we say, at this point in time, you no longer have the choice of whether or not your body is going to take care of this individual or not. It's not about a public good. It's about an individual's body. So it's just two very different questions, but you see them tied together a lot.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up reproductive health care and reproductive freedom. And so I want to dive in a little bit deeper into that. And we had the leaked case a couple of weeks ago from the U.S. Supreme Court. We don't know where that will go and what the final written decision will look like, but it gave us an inkling of the direction of the court, of course, and really overriding 50 years of precedents by Roe, and how not that has been honored over those 50 years, but it has given guidance for our nation of civil rights, for reproductive health care and reproductive choice. And so one of the kind of burning questions in that is whether or not it is states' rights to decide what is happening, or whether or not equal protection should be provided at a federal level. And I'm going to guess where you are on that, but I want you to be able to say that out loud and how you view that issue.
Sure. I like the way you worded the question. It belongs at the federal level. And the reason being is this is about whether or not a woman is a citizen of this country or not. And that's not decided on a state-to-state basis. full citizenship is granted at the federal level, and I would support a federal statement to that point. Again, I think Roe versus Wade was correct. It stated the fact that a woman's right to abortion is constitutionally guaranteed because it is about body autonomy. She's guaranteed the right to body autonomy, and that is part of body autonomy.
And so, if you were given the opportunity to be a U.S. Senator, how would you fight for that right for people who need that protection?
Well, it's one more good excuse for getting rid of the filibuster. Okay, it's a great excuse for getting rid of the filibuster. It's a great example of why that tool is archaic and doesn't belong there. It's 250 years since the founding of our country, and we're still debating whether or not women are full citizens. So getting rid of that tool is one of those pieces. I would absolutely support federal legislation that codifies a woman's right to choose. I've even said on the campaign trail, as far back as in October, when I spoke at the abortion justice rally in Des Moines, that I'm willing to write and introduce that legislation. I'm that passionate about full citizenship for all people in this country.
Thank you. And another kind of issue connected to the misuse of religious freedom and protecting people's civil rights is LGBTQ plus equality. And we know that religion is often used as a sledgehammer to take away people's rights, people who are LGBTQ plus. And right now there's the Equality Act that is sitting in the Senate. It's passed the House, and there's a lot of conversation about maybe another bill that will be more palatable to Republicans. But regardless of what the vehicle is, where are you, I guess, in protecting equal protections being made universal federally for people who are LGBTQ plus, making sure that people's rights are protected regardless of what state they are in, whether they live in that state, whether they visit another state. How would you like to see that done? Is that a state by state issue, or is that a federal issue?
Well, I really feel like we should be able to just acknowledge that LGBTQI people of color, women, immigrants, all people are seen equally and treated equally in the eyes of the law in this nation, right? We shouldn't need an act for that, but quite clearly we do, because there are so many groups that are tying in their personal beliefs and trying to use that to remove rights from other people, just like I shared earlier about the anti-Islamic group. And the LGBTQ community has suffered with this, for generations. I mean, well before this country was a country, well before we had foot on the earth here, in this part of the hemisphere, this has just been an issue that of inclusion and a struggle that it is just time to lay to rest. And I do believe that the federal legislation is the right way to begin doing that. You are not going to be changing people's hearts and minds about what they believe religion says about transgender, homosexuality, intersex, whatever. We're not going to change that, but we are going to make the opportunities equal for every person in this nation. Again, our government's job isn't to legislate when life begins. It's not to legislate what type of behaviors are moral or immoral. Our job is to set a structure of rules about how we're going to be able to behave in this nation in a fair playing field to pursue our lives, liberty, and health and wealth. That's what it's about. It's not about who is good and who is bad. It's about what's the playing field going to look like. And we determined at the very beginning that we wanted this playing field to be equal. We just didn't really define who we meant equal for. It's got to be equal for everyone.
Yeah. And some would argue that even in the writing of our founding documents, there wasn't really equality written in either.
Right. They actually wrote inequality into it
Right.
with the 3/5 compromise for African Americans, and
Right.
here we are today. That's why we're talking about reparations, right?
Right. Exactly. So one of the jobs of a U.S. senator is to vote on nominees for the courts, the federal courts, and you would have a role in those appointments to the federal bench. And depending on which committees you're on, but you would certainly have a role in voting on those. And so our country just went through the appointment process with a U.S. Supreme Court nominee, and arguably one of the most qualified people ever to be considered for the court. And yet Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson faced, in my opinion, a ridiculous amount of partisan and personal attacks and inappropriate questions in the hearing process. And one of those questions came about her personal faith and from Senator Lindsey Graham. And he asked, on a scale of 1 to 10, how faithful would you say you are in terms of religion? And to me, that is nobody's business of knowing how faithful anyone is that is applying for anything in the government. But so my question to you is, if you had the opportunity to ask a question of a candidate, of a nominee, what would that question be for somebody who you are considering to vote for or against as a justice or a judge in the federal courts?
Well, I think the question that really matters is about how they interpret the Constitution of the United States of America. And there's a few schools of thought on that. Do you interpret it as it must be interpreted in the context in which it was written only? Or do you look at interpreting it in the context of what the world is like today and what we know about the world today? And so I'd want to know what their ability to look at law and look at our Constitution as a living document or as a stagnant document. Which of those directions do they come from? Because again, it's about how are you going to keep the playing field fair?
Yeah. I'm going to switch gears one more time, and this will be kind of my last area of questions. But I want to talk about public education and K-12 education, not higher ed. We're going to set that aside for now. But in Iowa, we have really amazing schools, amazing public school teachers, and public school staff administrators who work really hard to ensure the needs of every student, regardless of who that student is. If they walk in the door, they are there to serve and to teach and to help that student learn. And we know that public school teachers, staff administrators, and school boards are being attacked left and right across Iowa by religious and other extremists. And also, on top of that, school districts across Iowa are really struggling because they have insufficient funding to meet the needs of students. And then, of course, there's the whole misinformation piece of what educators do and don't do in the classroom, and things like, should there be cameras in the classrooms, those kind of things. It's mostly a state issue, obviously, and guidance on that. But certainly the federal government has a role in the conversation about how we educate our young people, our children. And do you think that there is a way that the federal government can mandate or incentivize states to be better at supporting public schools, public school teachers, and what would that look like in your world as a U.S. Senator?
I believe what I was taught in 7th grade, which is you get better response, you get prolonged behaviors with positive reinforcement. Okay, so when you find somebody doing something well, you say good job, and you reward them for it. Okay, and then you do that on a sporadic basis, and you increase the longevity of that. But how it works. The point is, positive reinforcement is what works to help people and institutions and organizations improve. And so what I would expect is a state finding those opportunities in their state, finding those places where where education is being done well, where a teacher is doing well, where a program is doing well, and they incentivize that program to go to other schools that may not be doing as well in that area, and recreating and sharing that tool. What doesn't work, what we find is the worst way to improve behavior is punishment. So taking away money from programs, closing down underperforming schools, those are not ways that benefit. Creating vouchers so that we're going to take your money and we're going to give it to somebody else and let them try. That's not how it works. We want to invest in those places that need the investment. From the federal level, what we do is we incentivize states to do that, right? So we reward states that do that. Now, I don't ever want to see federal money that's supposed to be going to a school board or a school system being withheld. So I would never go after a state's school money. What we go after is things like your transportation money. We go after these areas and say, look, if you're not going to perform well, and do the work that it takes to have quality education, because your student isn't going to just live in your state, right? We're a pretty fluid country. People move around. It's not just about Iowa. So you're going to have to prepare an Iowan for a global economy. Okay, and participating in a global job market, and we're gonna hold your state to that standard, and I think that it's using monies that are outside of education to kind of hold the hand of the fire. They're usually much bigger dollars anyway.
And do you think that there's anything particular that the federal government should be doing to incentivize states? The states are always ranked on a variety of different things, different factors. And one of the things that we're most curious about and most concerned about, I guess I should say, is the disparities amongst different groups of children and how they learn and what they have access to. And so whether it is students who are ELL, whether it is racial disparities, whether it is learning issues, whatever that may be, is there more that the federal government could be doing to help states that are struggling to serve those underserved students? And I would put also students in poverty as well. And that's probably one of the biggest groups. Is there a way that the federal government can be doing this work, helping states to do this work better?
Well, I think part of it is food and nutrition. Is one place that the federal government can really be involved in terms of what they can provide. I believe the SNAP program through the Farm Bill is something that we want to protect. We want to expand. We want to make sure that people have healthy bodies and healthy environments to live in, so that they can receive an education. We've got so many people that live in this country who are in inadequate housing or no housing at all, and who have inadequate access to healthy food and inadequate access to activities that keep their bodies healthy, inadequate access to medical care, and inadequate sleep. So when we have a health system that doesn't support healthy lives, we don't have a health system. We have a sick system. So if we had a health system, then we could support healthy lives and put people in a position where they're better able to learn. How do you measure? You brought up measurement of that a little bit. So let me define that health system first of all. It's very simple. It's the Medicare for All Act. It's not a Medicare option. It's not reducing drug prices. It's not any of these little Band-Aids on a cannonball wound. We've got to go from a sick care system to a healthcare system. And Medicare for All is a healthcare system that provides access to care for every person in this nation from death to birth, birth to death. It provides vision, dental, hearing, long-term care, mental health care access, all of those things that we need to live happy, healthy lives. And the emphasis then goes on healthcare because we're going to try to prevent sickness within this system. And so when we get healthy bodies and healthy minds, healthy access to food, then you can learn. How do we know that that's worked? Well, we look at not just your graduation rates in your state, okay, and not just your performance on tests. We look at where do the young people who came out of your program fit in the employment and jobs and economy of our country. Did we succeed in making people who can live successful lives, or did we just give you a little pressed seal on a piece of paper and say you went to school for 4 years? So we need to measure the outcomes not just by how many people got a piece of paper in their hands, but how many people entered the workforce and were able to remain in there as productive members.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to give you a minute or two to tell folks whatever else you want to share with them about yourself, about your views. We've talked about some pretty hefty topics, but if there are things that you left out that you want to make sure people know, or just whatever you want to share in just a minute or two to do that.
Thanks. I appreciate that. We have talked some pretty heavy items here. And I get very passionate. I'm generally a nice guy and pretty easy to get along with. And I am always looking for options to help people succeed and to find where people are succeeding and share that with more folks. But yes, I do come from a very progressive direction. The term hearken like has been used, and I appreciate that. I do believe it is going to take a hearken like candidate to win this particular race and go to the U.S. Senate. And I believe we want a hearken like representative in the Senate. This is a gentleman who delivered the Americans with Disability Act, an individual who supported a woman's right to choose throughout his political career, a person who was bold and assertive in getting things done in the U.S. Senate, and that's the type of person that I will be, and that I am, and that I will continue to be as I go forward. I don't believe there's any hope for change if we keep doing things the way we've been doing them. That might, interpret that however you want. If we're putting the same candidates forward that we always put forward, we're going to continue to lose. Putting people forward that want to talk about their democratic value or whatever value it is they have, but not about getting the actual work done and having a plan for getting the work done, that's a recipe for failure. We talked just briefly about the filibuster. I look at the filibuster as an impediment to getting work done. You brought up about the justices getting appointed. I actually roll filibuster and some other things together in what I call Senate rules reform, where we wouldn't have lost the opportunity to hear about Merrick Garland if we had a Senate rule in place that said we're going to have hearings within 60 days of an appointment. Pass or fail the appointment, fine. We're going to move on to the next individual until we get somebody in place. We can remove partisanship so that it's not you're elected and then do what the Democratic leadership says by changing the amount of time you can serve on a committee and the amount of time you can be a leader on a committee and the way you get appointed to a committee, instead of it being partisan, that it has to do with seniority and a lottery system for new people. There's got to be a way to remove that partisanship so that we can start actually talking about what we believe in and legislating in that manner. So I would look forward to the opportunity to serve Iowa and hope to live up to that reputation of a hearken-like Democrat.
Dr. Glenn Hurst, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate the conversation and the ideas that you bring to the conversation. And thank you to folks who are watching, whether you're watching live or watching the recording, and we're glad that you have spent some time with us. I hope you will check out the other conversations that we're having with the other two candidates. One is already recorded and up on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, and the other one will be there in a week when I have that conversation. You can go to our website at interfaithallianceiowa.org to learn more about these conversations, but also more about our work. And in the end, I hope that you vote in the primary on Tuesday, June 7th, and that you vote in the general election in November, because voting really does matter. If you are not registered to vote yet, I encourage you to do that. If you know of other folks who are not registered, please do encourage them to vote, because their vote and their voice actually does matter. Dr. Hurst, thank you so much again for joining me.
Sure. Thank you. And don't forget to watch the debates on Iowa Public Television on Thursday at 7 p.m.
Great. Fabulous. And to everyone else, please stay safe and be well and take care. Thank you.
Thank you.